I'm sorry, but I don't think there's been a single scholar in the UK that has commented on these quadcopters. You know what they do? They imitate the sounds of babies, luring adults out into open spaces so that they try and find the babies and then they assassinate them. And we have silence. But do you agree with the notion that a weapon should not leave the UK soil and go to the Zionist state? There is only one organization that is doing that, and that is Palestine Action. If I said to anybody, I have a bullet here right in front of you, put it on the table, if you confiscate that bullet and put it in your pocket, a Palestinian doesn't die. What does Islam say about picking up that bullet? The people that I look up to most, right? And this is where the frustration came from. It's our ulema that are the true leaders of our communities. But is that the case in the middle of a genocide? At the very best, the response and the role has been extremely lacking. One of the things that you learn from political prisoners in particular is that they understand context and they understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's rahmah more than almost anybody else. Prisoners are much more free than those of us who are on the outside. They don't go to these platitudes about, well, if you change what's inside yourself, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will change your condition. No, they know that actually my problem right now is that there is a guy who's holding a gun to my head and keeping me locked up. One of the youngest political prisoners in the UK right now. Here's this young woman who, subhanAllah, intrinsically understands that her role is to stop those weapons. That's what righteousness that is based on the Quran looks like. We found in this young woman the essence of the deen encapsulated. We teach a form of aqidah, we teach a form of tawheed that I don't think is necessarily practiced. What will happen to us, what will happen to our dawah if we speak about things that the Charity Commission might take umbrage with? Do we actually believe that if we actually spoke the truth, that it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that will protect us in that circumstance? Like Francesca Albanese is not going to teach us how to be better Muslims.
Assalamu alaikum, Asim. Dr Asim Qureshi. You wrote an article recently, an open letter to scholars and leaders in times of genocide. Just tell us a bit about why you felt you wanted to write that.
Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. I think it was building up for a while. The letter, the arguments in the letter really come from looking at 18 months of a genocide taking place. And this isn't like any other time. A genocide is a very, very specific thing. And not only is it quite specific, it's live streamed for us. Like for those of us who grew up in the 80s and 90s, we saw what happened with Bosnia, but we were receiving like these VHS tapes. You might have to explain to some of the Ugandans as well what a VHS tape is, right? But we were receiving these tapes months and months after the massacres were taking place. And so, we were watching what was happening. But by that stage, what we were witnessing as one of the worst genocides in Europe had already happened. And had happened a long time ago already by that stage. And it wasn't so easy to connect in a live way with those who were being affected on the ground. But this is different. This is the first time we are being forced and being subjected to these images of Palestinians, Gazans, Muslims, men, women and children being brutalized in ways that it's almost unfathomable. It's really like when we at some point really take stock of what happened with all of this, I think what we're going to see and have to ask ourselves is, how did we even exist at a time where any of this was possible? How did we, as almost a quarter of the world's population as Muslims, how were we forced to bear the atrocities on a daily basis, an hourly basis, on a minute-by-minute basis, when this latest aggression, kind of heightened again? Not that the aggression ever went away. And like it's like an endless scroll of these images, and so the arguments that I made in the letter, the things that I've been thinking about constantly, consistently over the last 18 months, because there is this perception that somehow Israel is this like almost powerful, almost omnipotent state. That the Zionist entity somehow has this control over the world, that it's just simply not true. And I always wonder about that in relation to the people that I look up to most. right? And this is where the frustration came from, which is, you know, I've grown up in a tradition which tells me that it's our ulema that are the true leaders of our communities. Like, I don't look to political leadership. I first, when I'm thinking about my life and my role and my responsibility, I'm not calling up a political leader to get that advice and that guidance. I'm calling my scholars and asking them, I'm struggling with X, I'm struggling Y, I'm struggling with Z. What do you think we should be doing at this time? And that's how it should be as well. But is that the case in the middle of a genocide? And I would argue that at the very best, the response and the role has been extremely lacking.
What do you wish you had seen instead of what you've seen?
I think a lot more bravery to speak about what's going on there, a lot more knowledge as well. I think sometimes people are quite happy, or not happy. I don't think anybody's happy in this situation, and I don't want to ascribe that to them. They're content that they made dua, that they generally have an understanding of what's going on in terms of, like, there's something bad happening, and, you know, thousands of lives are being lost, and it's a terrible situation. But there isn't even a vernacular to speak about, well, you know, what is Zionism, and, you know, what is the occupation? I remember just recently being at a Tarawih during this Ramadan. There was a pitch by a charity. The brother who's doing the pitch is somebody who's, mashallah, like very, very well known. He's well celebrated. He's an excellent brother. I really have a lot of time for him. Does amazing work. But he kept on saying the same thing during his pitch, that in order for Palestinians to move on with their lives, they need an education, right? That they need like the tools and the resources to get a proper education. And he kept on saying so they can move forward with their lives. And as I sat there, and my kids were asking me, should we donate? Like, kind of quietly, as we were sitting there listening to the pitch in the middle of the Tarawih, in the break between the Tarawih. And I said, yeah.
Which is the Tarweeha.
Sorry?
Which is, the break is why it's called Tarawih, isn't it? For fundraising.
They say, you know, should we donate to this? I said, yeah, we should donate to it. But we should also understand that what he's saying isn't correct. The impediment to Palestinians moving on with their lives is not the lack of access to education. And they are a very well-educated community, actually. It's the occupation. It's the genocide, right? That is the barrier. And it's this idea that we can bandage our way through what is actually happening to the Palestinians by giving them aid, by doing reconstruction work. That is the issue. And that narrative is unhelpful.
That notion is unhelpful, of course. I mean, I remember hearing when I was in graduate school, university, that the statistic that Palestinians have, or Gaza in particular, has the highest concentration of PhD holders in the world, or something like that. You know, so they are the most, on average, highly literate, highly educated population. That's certainly not the issue. But I think a part of the issue is, or why that comes about, is this joke. Funny enough, a rabbi told me once, many years ago. He said there's a guy who's stumbling around in the dark under a street lamp in the night, obviously, and he's looking for his keys. Someone asks you what happened. I'm looking for my keys. I was like, oh, let me help you. Where did you lose them? Or where did you? He said, I lost them over there. So why are you looking here? Oh, because this is where the light is. Yeah, I think every culture has something similar.
Right.
But if I'm part of a charity that does, you know, schools, I'm going to try and shoehorn whatever in a good way for that intention.
Of course.
Because, like, I want to help. So this is the way the only way I can help. You know.
Right.
But also where it gets really problematic. A few weeks ago, there was like a really senior kind of I didn't know him personally, but someone that my local masjid that was showing a lot of respect to, saying he's Sheikh al-Hadith in some such and such country, and he's going to give us a little reminder. It's in Urdu, I think. And I just gave away what country he's from. Oops. But he said, you know, he's given a reminder, and it's all on, you know, what I felt like conflicted. Should I be kind of happy with this or upset by this? Or because he was talking about individual, I don't want to say little, but like individual sunnahs in the salah, like, you know, which way your fingers should face and how your feet should be, and you're saying, you know, people are losing the little things in our salah. And I thought, is this really what we want to be? You know, you're telling people this is a highly educated scholar, someone worthy of our respect, and yet his address is on that kind of focus. And of course, I mean, you can still, you know, part of me was saying, you know, come on, you know, at least, you know, the small things make up the big things, right? So, you know, showing love for the Prophet ﷺ, following his sunnah, that's part of a broader narrative. You can fit it in with that, like this is part of our, but it wasn't even that, it was just kind of, hey, this is so important, people have lost the sunnah. I was like, oh, lost the sunnah. Yeah, your toes should be facing the qibla when you're in sujood. Not to belittle it, but I didn't know how to feel. I don't know, does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I mean, this just resonates a lot. It's hard because you want people to learn their deen. You want them to worship Allah as fully as they possibly can. But I think, you know, 21 years of helping political prisoners in places like Guantanamo Bay, and like all sorts of dark prisons all over the world. One of the things that you learn from political prisoners in particular, you know, as they practice their deen, is that they understand context and they understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's rahmah more than almost anybody else, better than almost any other group. They really understand how to apply the verse فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ, right? That to be conscious and aware of Allah as much as you're able. So they do what they can because they know that the system of oppression that they're living under is really the issue. They know who their enemy is. They know who's oppressing them. They know who's abusing them. And what Islam looks like in that environment, in that situation, is so framed by that experience. They know specifically that, you know, they don't go to these kind of like platitudes about, well, if you change what's inside yourself, you know, then you will, you know, kind of, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will change your condition. No, they know that actually my problem right now is that there is a guy who's holding a gun to my head and keeping me locked up inside this prison, and I have no ability to change that except doing what I can, right? And so they do what they can. They seek their rights as they can. They disrupt the prison as much as they can. They worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fully, because they're in such a difficult situation. And I always say that prisoners are much more free than those of us who are on the outside, because they're free to worship Allah completely. It's one of the most amazing things that actually the entire dynamic of what worship looks like gets inverted entirely. Those of us who are free but caged by our fears, by our desires, by so much. But actually prisoners, what they show us so consistently is that they have a purity of relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Doesn't mean they don't struggle. They do struggle. They do struggle. Of course they struggle. You know, they have their moments that they go up and down, but there is a purity of that relationship because they have nothing to lose anymore. The thing that they were worried about has already been taken away from them. And so they are free to worship Allah as freely as they can. And my concern about a lot of this conversation is that, you know, and I've heard this from a lot of scholars, which is, what will happen to us, what will happen to our dawah if we speak about things that, for example, the Charity Commission might take umbrage with? And it's actually those conversations that I've had that were really the impetus in the end for writing the letter. Because in that I find, forget about anything else, just from a theological perspective, an issue. Because I think that we're all taught that this religion doesn't rest on our shoulders, that the hidayah of any individual we're not the sabab for it at all. I think we're taught that consistently. And our organizations sometimes make those platitudes as well. But do we actually practice that? Do we actually believe? Do we have certainty that if we actually spoke the truth, that it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that will protect us in that circumstance? And I don't think that's the case. And this is why, I kind of was talking about in the letter, this idea of spiritual dissonance, that we teach a form of aqeedah, we teach a form of tawheed, that I don't think is necessarily practiced, because when it comes to the moments where you should be brave, where you should be speaking up, and I'm not even talking about outside of the law, we can get onto that conversation in a moment, right? I'm talking about within the confines of even what British law allows, but somehow we self-censor more than even what is allowed in the public space. So what does that say about us then, and about what we believe and what we portray to our communities and what we're teaching them?
Could it be because, like that guy under the spotlight, the street lamp, he's like, this is where all I can see. The guy who's the sheikh, who's Sheikh al-Hadith, he's talking about in the reports from the Prophet ﷺ, that's his forte, that's his comfort zone, that's the thing he knows well. Maybe he feels, or they feel uncomfortable, or maybe a kind of imposter syndrome if they talk about quote unquote politics, if they talk about what's happening in Palestine more. Could that be the case rather than fear? Maybe,
I mean, it's you know, a very strong husn al-dhan approach, I think, would indicate that. Except that I don't think that's good enough for a start. I think there's no way that you can watch what's happening in the media and still have that excuse. And I think if you're still making that excuse, because it's not like we're talking about people who are learned in the deen, right? Yeah. People who understand the Quran better than I do. People who have, you know, read the Quran more than I have. People who, and I'm talking about myself as like a general member of the public here now, okay, who's not an alim, right? They have access and understanding and learning of our book, which is a book of ethics and guidance that is supposed to be guiding how we operate in the world. Now, if these guys were completely apolitical, I'm talking about the masajid and the mosque committees as well as the ulema now, and they didn't invite like local MPs into the mosque and didn't, you know, kind of meet with local councillors and do lots of political things in their daily lives, you might make an exception and say, okay, this guy, he's literally just interested in teaching the fiqh of tahara like week in, week out to his congregation, right? And that's it. Maybe you can make an excuse for something like that, that he really has a specialization. But I think there is a bit of cherry picking about what politics looks like here. And, you know, when it comes to giving an MP a platform in your mosque, or attending an iftar at Downing Street or whatever it might be, then all of a sudden, like, the politics becomes less hazy. It becomes, oh, well, you know, we need to engage. Okay, well, so you're engaging. You have an idea of what the political elements of, you know, this faith look like. So why are you not then engaging on this, which is, again, the single most important issue of our time? There are many issues.
Let's characterize or describe the breadth of the problem, though. Is this like, would you say this is a majority of scholars in your opinion, a loud minority, or a conspicuous kind of minority, half and half? Or are there some scholars that you see that are speaking out, are doing the right things?
Yeah, I think there are. I think there are scholars who are doing.
Because if it was a case where everyone is wrong, then I would be thinking, well, maybe they're right and we're wrong.
Perhaps.
But if there's,
I think there are
people,
notable examples out there. And inshallah, I'm not going to take any names on either side in this. You know,
I think it's good to maybe fine to mention names in terms of praising them and commending them, but obviously not. We don't want to kind of.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think when I look at the landscape and I look at, okay, who's talking about various elements of what's happening in Palestine on a regular basis, there are very few people that I could point to and say within the Islamic scholarly tradition and say, that is what guidance looks like. That's what leadership looks like. That is what on a global stage. There are very, very, very few. Like, we share the takes of people like Muhammad al-Qurd, for example, or Francesca Albanese, right? Because we're like, oh, they really understand what's going on here. Here are experts on the subject matter. They're talking about this, which is fine. And I think that's good. We should be sharing, you know, the work of these people. But where is the leadership that comes from for our own people as well? And this is this is significant because, again, it comes back to the whole point about, well, what if they have like their own specialization? But it's not about that. It's about how we communicate this faith that has answers, that has solutions, that gives direct guidance for these moments. How do we communicate that to our people so that they understand what their role is, not just in relation to the world that they live in, but their relationship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. And that's what's missing here. Like, Francesca Albanese is not going to teach us how to be better Muslims. She's going to help us think about what international law has to say about Zionist aggression and the occupation and apartheid and the right of resistance under international law. But what does the Quran have to say about these matters too? Because the Quran does have something to say.
And you think that is missing on a kind of global Islamic discourse
100%.
level? I mean, obviously there may be in localities, in different countries, different communities, there might be, individual murabbis and imams.
Absolutely,
and scholars
absolutely. I'm sure there are.
But you're saying in the English-speaking, Anglophone Muslim world, people don't know what their deen says about this? Or is there a vacuum or something?
I mean, I think that's part of it, right? Which is, if they do, then if the scholars are giving that guidance, then I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing it on the public stage, and I'm not seeing it from people that should know better as well.
So you're not talking about like the quote unquote,
yeah. I mean, look, they
mention your article. You're not talking about those that are actually actively supporting the Zionist regime. That's not even your.
I'm not even concerned with them. I mean, like, honestly, at this stage, I think we can all see what khiyana looks like. It's very, very, very clear.
So you're talking about those that you normally you feel disappointed by.
Right, absolutely. I think we can do better, and I think part of it as well is we're seeing a lot of student encampments around the world. We saw what was happening in Colombia. We saw the movement arising here in the UK. A lot of young people, a lot of young Muslims getting involved in these encampments. And one of the things that was very missing, at the peak of the encampments, was a scholarly response to what those encampments were about and what they were trying to do. And also an encouragement to other students as well to unite with those encampments too. I saw all sorts of narratives floating around in relation to it. I know of one brother in particular who was like telling Muslim students, don't get involved, not because he didn't think it's right. The exact opposite. And this is somebody with like multiple degrees in Islam. His whole point was, let those guys do it so that you don't get affected. Let maybe the lefties go forward, the leftist Muslims go forward. You guys sit back. And when I was hearing these things from the students themselves, that this is the advice that we're being given, I couldn't believe it. Like, where in our tradition does it say that Muslims should be hiding behind others on matters in relation to rectifying the fitna and the fasad on this earth? Right? Where are we? Where does it say that we're the ones who should be, in the back, not leading the charge?
Is this someone who maybe feels some kind of Abyssinia discourse?
Perhaps.
Situated in the broader kind of, we don't belong here, we're here kind of temporarily, don't rock the boat.
Perhaps.
That kind of thing.
Perhaps that might be the case. But I mean, he's speaking to people who have been born and raised here, and it really, really shocked me a lot. I remember speaking to one ISOC in London, and I was speaking to the Emir, and he was saying to me, look, brother, we can't really get involved with the encampment because we've got a really good relationship with the university, with the university administration. Like, literally, this is exactly what he's saying to me. And for months, we have been pushing for the sisters to get their own prayer room, and they've finally agreed to it, and it's going to happen. They're going to kind of construct the sisters' own prayer space, and that'll be just for them. And so we don't want to get involved in the student encampment and jeopardize the sisters' prayer area. And I remember just like looking at him as if we were completely different, parallel universes. And I said to him, brother, You know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the entire earth a musalla. Like, as Muslims, in this, under the guidance of Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his ummah, we have been permitted to literally pray anywhere. Have you ever thought that the brothers could pray outside on, you know, wherever they find a space, and let the sisters take their prayer room, if you're that concerned about where the sisters pray? Like, it wouldn't be that much of a drama for you guys to do that if you chose to do it. Like, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not stopping you from praying, right? But don't let that be your excuse for why you're not getting involved. And it's this climate of fear that exists about what are the consequences and the repercussions for us speaking about the truth. And I think that's what's filtered down through, I believe, an unhelpful scholarly discourse, which is protect yourself, protect your own kind of like protect Muslim identity, your dunyawi interests, over being involved publicly with this type of activism. I mean, and honestly, I see that as being scholarly led.
There has to be obviously an assessment of the risks involved anyway, right?
Of course.
Otherwise, it's just recklessness. Courage is that kind of sweet spot between, okay, there's the presence of fear and kind of calculating risk, and the presence of the duty to actually do something good.
Right.
And you know, I do understand where someone will come from and say, as an organization, we don't officially get involved with X, Y, Z. I can get that. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I understand where they're coming from. But I would never say it publicly. You know, I would never say that this, because then it becomes a policy and people start, it almost as though like, and I was gonna get your thoughts about this as well. You know, I feel like a discomfort when I see Muslims meeting the Prime Minister and having that, you know, the whole Samosa diplomacy. But I feel, if only it was like behind closed doors, and if you feel you're getting something, you're able to build relationship, get some leverage, whatever, do it behind closed doors. And to me, that is that it's a politically astute person would do, not plaster it all over Facebook and, hey, look, I'm meeting the Prime Minister, I'm in Downing Street, because that feels kind of almost self-humiliating. But if you have a clear agenda, and I know people like this, they're very politically shrewd. They know, I can get this, I can exercise this leverage, I can get this out of this person. Yeah. I'm going to do it behind the scenes, you know, cloak and dagger, all that kind of stuff. I feel kind of that if you want to be like the Mu'min al-Fir'aun, the secret believer in the you know, the palace of Fir'aun, then there's a way for you to do that. But that shouldn't trickle down into the public thing. You know, that person should, I think you've written about this extensively as well in your last few books, that person should be ready to, you know, take the hits.
Right.
If he's, you know, if he or she is kind of playing that game, trying to get close to power.
At some point, the reality is, Salman, that everyone, and al-Qad writes about this in a recent book, everyone will always have been against this, right? Like at one point in the future, inshallah, whether it's on Yawm al-Qiyamah or in Jannah, inshallah, right? But at some point in the future, there will come a time when everyone will claim that I was always against what happened, right? And there will come a point in the future where everyone will recognize that Keir Starmer's government and the Tories before them were not just complicit in a genocide, they directly enabled a genocide. And at that point, when it's okay to say these things, everyone will want to say in that moment, we always knew, right? Now is the time to prove in that at that future moment that was your position. And the reality of this Keir Starmer government is that they are still selling weapons to the Zionist state, that they are still doing that to this moment.
Reconnaissance flights from the RAF.
Right, exactly. There is
actual material support.
There's material support. Elbit Systems is sending weapons all the way to the Zionist state that kills Palestinians. That is leaving the UK shores. And I'm sorry, but I don't think there's been a single scholar in the UK that has commented on the actions of Palestine Action. And let me be clear, I'm not asking a single scholar to go to an Elbit Systems factory and smash up drones or quadcopters. You know, these quadcopters, you know what they do? They imitate the sounds of babies as they fly around, luring adults out into open spaces so that they try and find the babies and then they assassinate them. That is what the quadcopters do. And we have silence about this work. Like, fine, maybe you don't agree with Palestine Action, but do you agree with the notion that a weapon should not leave the UK soil and go to the Zionist state?
So that's...
There is only one organization that is doing that, and that is Palestine Action. If I said to anybody, I have a bullet here, right in front of you, put it on the table. If you confiscate that bullet and put it in your pocket, a Palestinian doesn't die. What is the moral obligation here? Do you pick up the bullet? What does Islam say about picking up that bullet? Most scholars would say, of course you have to take that bullet away. Palestine Action is doing that. Even if it's just to delay those weapons getting to where they're going. But even in the delay, there is something righteous. Even in the delay. And we have silence on this. No one's asking you to smash anything up. But could you speak about what the morality of doing that might be? Could you use your voice to do that? Could you encourage people to maybe donate to a cause like that? Could you encourage people to support the political prisoners who are currently facing incarceration and potentially even some type of terrorism addition to their sentence if they're convicted? Could you encourage people to support them? But where is the narrative?
Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. I just need a few seconds of your time to tell you about our new campaigns that require your attention. Become one of 1,000 guardians who will defend the ummah, safeguard minds, strengthen faith, and uphold the truth through our new transformative campaigns. Number 1, Palestine Truth, exposing lies, amplifying Palestine voices, and countering false Zionist narratives. Number 2, Guarding Innocence, countering godless ideologies, ensuring our children grow up proud of their faith, values, and identity. Number 3, Power of a Muslim Woman, opposing individualism, avid materialism, and social decay by showcasing our homemakers and mothers as the true builders of civilization. And number 4, Hold On, saving lives by providing support for those battling hopelessness and suicidal thoughts. For just £10 a month, you will be part of a mission that aims to impact 500 million lives, inshallah. Do not miss out on the huge reward. Click the link in the description below and donate. So partly, I feel, because in just my job, I come across a lot of scholars and ulema and stuff. Their appetite is there, and maybe it's a failure on all of us to give them those narratives. That here's the stuff you can say, right? Here are your rights. Here's what you can say within the law. Here's what you should be saying, and I've always found them generally, apart from people maybe ideologically against kind of just doing anything useful, but the vast majority, in my opinion, they would happily take information that's reliable information that's given to them and pass it on to their communities and give that rubber stamp.
Sure.
I think it's a failure on all of our parts that it's not clear. I think, and definitely there's fear. There's a level of fear, especially when we all know the actual, what's happening. People just wearing a badge or whatever, going to school. And sometimes I feel, and that's why I like to kind of avoid spreading those types of stories sometimes, or sometimes or even personally, that don't tell people that I wore a badge to school and this happened and that happened, because then it's kind of almost paralyzing others. It's not that the fear is always going to be there, but if they're taught their rights, if they're taught here's what you can say legally, here are your rights, they can mitigate those fears. Yeah, they can say, look, not just whatever, issue a disclaimer or whatever, or just be careful that they're on the right side of the law, and nobody's expecting them to harm themselves. But I mean, if they do, I would say that's like a superior moral position for them to take at cost to themselves.
This is generous, and I think it's probably right as well in many respects. I do think, and at Cage, we do that regularly. We're constantly talking to ulema about our work. We're trying to kind of bring them into what we're doing. Some of it is quite technical, and yeah, of course, there's a responsibility there.
I think the problem, is not necessarily the ulama, but people in charge of institutions and charities and so forth. There is definitely an err on the side of caution kind of mentality amongst many.
Which comes from where, though?
I don't think it comes from the scholars, to be honest. I've seen a lot of scholars that are actually, their hands are tied by their organizations, their mosques.
No, I'm talking about where does that general fear come from? It's built out of the war on terror, right? And the notion that there will be repercussions for what you might do. Here's the thing, the reason why I feel very strongly about our scholars and their role in all of this is because, I grew up being told and really believing that they're the inheritors of the prophets. And there is no narrative in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that in a time of great injustice, that take the path of least resistance. It doesn't occur. In fact, we're told the exact opposite, that these moments in particular, constantly and consistently, will have potentially some kind of sanction on the other side of them. And that is what is often missing, this bravery that is embedded in the Quran, and this tawakkul on Allah, this idea. And that's why I keep on coming back to the idea of theology. Like, what does our belief have to say about this? Like, we can kind of like politique our way out of this situation. We can say, we need to like maneuver, we need to adjust, we need to do this, we need to do that, we need to do the other. But what that does is that masks the central ethics of what we're talking about here. That's my concern. My concern actually ultimately is about who we are as Muslims. Like, forget about all of the ins and outs of this debate. Who are we? How do we relate to the Quran? How do we teach this faith? How do we understand and truly commit to the idea that Allah has power and control over everything in this universe? And how do we convey that to another generation of Muslims so they feel strong and confident in themselves? Yesterday, my wife and I, we went to a prison to meet a young woman, early 20s. I'm trying to keep the details vague. She's one of the youngest political prisoners in the UK right now. She's only a couple of years older than my eldest son. She was allegedly involved in an action with Palestine Action to stop weapons leaving from the UK to Israel. And Elbit Systems, it manufactures 85% of Israel's military-grade drones and quadcopters right there, and all of that goes directly into Gaza. Here's this young woman who, subhanallah, intrinsically understands that her role is to stop those weapons. That's what righteousness that is based on the Quran looks like.
She's picking up that bullet.
She's picking up that bullet. She's doing that herself. And subhanAllah, when, I'm still like, I actually haven't processed this meeting properly yet. Even my wife and I, when we finished the prison visit, we were in the car and it was about a 50-minute drive to get home. We found it very difficult to talk to one another because we found in this young woman the essence of the deen encapsulated. We were trying to ask her about, what is life like inside prison for you? What can we do for you? How can we do some kind of khidmah for you? What is the thing that we can do with all the expertise that we have in helping political prisoners? She didn't care about any of that stuff. All she wanted to know, what's happening outside right now? What's happening to the Gazans right now? What is the latest with the ceasefire? Is there a possibility of it? She was then kind of asking about what's happening with Syria, how the brothers and sisters over there, what does liberation look like for them right now? Everything in her mind was geared towards what's happening on the outside. Don't worry about me. And subhanAllah, there was one moment which, you know, really, I think took us both aback and moved us a great deal, where she was talking about a moment of weakness that she had. She said that, you know, and she described as being an itikaf in prison. She was just like, this Ramadan, like, you know, I read more Quran than I ever have. I've read Tarawih. I'm like really engaging in a way that I never have. I'm in itikaf with you know, during this month. And subhanAllah, it was a very, very moving moment. She effectively said, I'm trying to remember exactly, sorry.
So in a moment of weakness.
Yeah, so in a moment of weakness, she said that I was asking Allah, making dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant me bail. That's it. Like, it's not even a big deal. Like, you know, anybody would want bail. Like anyone who's a political prisoner would want to be outside with their friends and their family and going about their, even as they're facing trial. You'd rather be outside and facing trial than inside in remand. And she said, and then we saw the news come through about Israel's, or the Zionist state's complete backing off of the ceasefire agreement and the sight of people being killed. And she said, I felt so ashamed that I was asking for such a thing at this time. And it really humbled me a great deal to think that here is this young woman in this position, in this place, and almost no one has spoken about her outside of Cage and a couple of other organizations, of course, like, you know, the organization that she was involved with. But, you know, where are we for her? You know, we it's so funny because you hear all these talks where people want to talk about, like, you know, the idea of courage in Islam, and they talk about mu'tasim billah, kind of sending a letter to the you know, the Roman emperor at the time, saying, I'm going to send an army so large that when you see the first soldier, the last soldiers are only going to just be leaving my court, right? Like, you know, we talk about this just for the defense of a Muslim woman, right? As a theoretical thing. Here we have not just one, multiple young Muslim women, and even non-Muslim women, right, who are in prison right now for doing things that the vast majority of us would never do. But there's complete silence about them, like almost complete silence. And so what does that say about us and where we're at? Nobody, as I said, nobody's asking anybody to smash anything up. But
why are you not?
Sorry.
Why are you not asking someone to smash something up? And
because I think that's for a start. Like, we can't even get people to talk about these types of actions. Forget about actually doing the action itself. Like, I would love for that to be part of the conversation, but I'm being like really realistic.
I'm just trying to say. You know,
yeah, I know. I get it. I'm trying to be realistic though. So at least talk about it. At least make dua for them by name and specifically, and educate yourself. And actually, you know, you were saying earlier about, like, we have a responsibility to educate these ulema about what's going on in the world. Okay, fine. To an extent, I agree with you. But they're the ulama, right? Does that not mean anything to us anymore? Like, nothing. Is this a meaningless conception now, that the only thing that we expect for them to do is teach us how to pray and make ablution? Is that the function of their role now? Because there's also the difference between a masjid and a musalla, right? There's also the difference between those two things. You can pray anywhere, but a masjid that fulfills its function as a masjid is a completely different thing, and it's a life-altering thing. Speak to anybody who goes to a masjid like Lewisham Mosque, right? And they'll tell you the difference between a masjid and a musalla. And that's the difference between, like, actual scholarship, one that is rooted in the ethics of the Quran, and those who just teach fiqh to people to just help them get through their, like, everyday kind of worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this dissonance that we have between these two positions, I think speaks more about who we are as Muslims and as a Muslim society than it does specific. Forget about the genocide for a moment. Who are we? And what do we expect of ourselves? And why are our standards so low? And why are our expectations so low?
I mean, not to present it as an excuse or anything, but just as a point of clarification for us that there's a difference between ulema and alim in the language of the Quran and the Sunnah. And that's doesn't necessarily mean someone who's just graduating a particular person.
Sure, yeah. I'm not talking about like a 14-year-old mufti from like mashallah who's graduated and has like really learned something, and it's a remarkable thing that they do. I'm not talking about them for sure. I'm talking about people with knowledge, experience and wisdom here, who have like steeped themselves in the Quran and who have like real ilm, right, as we conceive of it. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So one of the things that we want them to do is not get out of their comfort zone, okay, that you're an expert in that, fair enough, we need experts in that, but broaden your discourse, your public address, or situate that thing that you're an expert in, situate that as part of, and remind people that that's part of a broader discourse. And also important to that discourse is Palestine, making yourself aware of how to interpret what's happening in Palestine, the genocide, the live stream, and all that kind of stuff. Okay, in terms of the knowledge, in terms of the speaking element. Okay, another thing we want them to do is get out of the fear bubble, or don't talk to me a bit more about fear. Then, so it's clear that we want them to talk more about Palestine. Okay, if you're saying there's a vacuum. Okay, and we need people that are seen as global leaders or regional leaders in Islamic kind of thought and learning and discourse. Talk about Palestine more. Talk about Zionism. Address the elephant in the room. But talk to me about fear now. How do they overcome that fear, which you're saying is preventing them from doing more, going beyond that?
I mean, I think there's very simple things that you can do first, right? Like we've discussed already, I think it's worthwhile educating yourself about the law a little bit.
Because then you separate from imagined fears,
right,
and actual legitimate fears.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's definitely helpful, and we have all sorts of resources that can help.
So briefly, what does the law say? What can they get away with in terms of?
I mean, for instance, right, Israel does not have a right to exist legally. It doesn't. It's that simple. The Zionist state does not have a legal right to exist, especially in the form of a settler colonial apartheid regime. I'm in all sorts of groups with various ulema and whatever else, and some of the discourse that you see sometimes where, even to the extent where some people will say, oh well, they're suffering so much, shouldn't all the Palestinians just leave, right? Like the level of understanding about what this situation is actually about is so, quite frankly, like low, and to use the word pathetic, it's actually very, very, very troubling.
So maybe we can make some kind of resource or some kind of.
Well, those resources are all out there.
You're paralyzed with the plethora and the multitude of information. I guess you need something curated saying, if you suffer from this is what you need to know.
Perhaps.
Because
and you're much more generous than you're much more generous than I am then, in terms of how much you're willing to lead people, because this whole conversation, this whole thing starts from the leadership has been inverted in a way that it should never have been. We should have received the leadership from the other direction, but it is what it is. Okay, and fine. So yeah, fine, you can educate yourself about the law, even about, say, for example, the resistance. Nobody talks about the resistance, and the reason they don't talk about the resistance is because they don't want to have their charity shut down or their masajid shut down. But there's no legal problem with doing that. They have, if we're going to limit ourselves just to international law, there is a complete legitimate right for the Palestinians to use violence in order to repossess dispossessed land. And that goes all the way back to the Nakba. We're not even talking about 67 borders. We're not even talking about the current settlements, the encroached settlements around the West Bank. I'm talking about even pre-Nakba, there is an international law right for them to reclaim any dispossessed land. But here's the thing, I hate, like, as somebody who studied international law, that's my master's, I've been using international law my whole life. Right, it's the Quran that really moves me on these issues more than anything else. You read Surah Shura or Surah Hajj, right? When I want to understand dispossession, I don't have to go to international law. I take my ethics from the Quran itself, which tells me specifically that when you are dispossessed, you have every right to recover that land. Every right, every single right. And even if they attack you back, that you should still take those rights back. And of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does say that you can be forgiving, but the Palestinians don't want to be forgiving. The Palestinians have said that we want to reclaim our dispossessed land, and they have every right to do so.
So they have an unquestionable right under international law of armed resistance. That's clear. You can support that.
Absolutely.
What you can't do is invite support for any specific proscribed groups, right?
Yes, that's
especially
correct.
Like Hamas, for example, was proscribed, I think 2 or 3 years ago, thanks to Priti Patel.
Yes.
So that's one thing you can obviously, and we should be stating clearly that all Palestinians have the right to resistance, armed resistance, political resistance, however they choose to exercise that right.
But that also we have the right to support them in that as well. There's nothing that stops us whatsoever. The only thing that stops us is our own imagination of what this world should look like. Unfortunately, violence is a part of this world, right? It's not, there is no ethic of non-violence, because we understand that, unfortunately, violence is deployed by, in all sorts of unjust ways, whether it's in the private sphere or the public sphere, in an international way, in a domestic way. Like, violence is unfortunately a very, very, very unfortunate part of the human condition. And of course, it's spoken about in the Quran that, you've been ordered to fight even though it's something that you might dislike, right? It's not not something that people want, but it is part of the unfortunate human condition.
And paradoxically, any movement or philosophy that builds itself or tries to reduce violence to zero ends up becoming incredibly violent. or facilitating violence.
Absolutely.
In one way or another.
I mean, look, the UN's mandate was to end aggression, in the world. Not only did it not do that, it ended up creating a system and a structure that normalized masses and masses of violence. Industrialized violence by powerful nations without being able to hold them to account. So it normalized a liberal violence that really impacted on dispossessed people all over the world. And no example is greater than that of the Zionist state, which has been consistently provided cover by kind of UN bodies and administrations, especially the Security Council, if we're just honest about what's going on here. And all of that is through not just the complicity by the enactment of the role that the British and the Americans have played, predominantly more so than anyone else. We have to have responses to these things.
So we're talking here up till now about things that ulema should say and things that they can say. What else? So we in terms of practical, what should they be doing more of?
I think they should actually turn their masajid into effectively what looks like a rank for Palestine. Like at this time right now, people need to know that we are directly connected to what's happening in Gaza. Like, we are directly connected by virtue of the fact that we live in the UK, we pay our taxes here, especially those of us who live in the West, right? Especially those in America and the UK. Like these two countries in particular, who are directly involved in the genocide, living in these lands has implications for us, right? It has to have implications for us because there is that direct connection. So what is our role then? Our role is to constantly then hold our own governments to account, but also to use whatever institutions we have as a row and a rank in the Palestinian resistance, whatever that looks like. Okay, so for us, the masjid should have Palestine on its agenda all the time because we are witnessing a genocide. This isn't it's not just a small thing. It's really not just like, this is just like, oh, this is just happening in Palestine. It's always been happening in Palestine. They've always been oppressed people. Yeah, we've always made dua for them, whatever else. This is significant because it speaks to who we are and what our ambitions are as a people and what we're willing to let go. And if at this time we're willing to let this go, then I really fear for what Islam looks like in this world. For those of us who have the access to the resources that we have access to the type of media and technology that we have. What does that mean for our future, especially here in the UK? If life is so cheap, what does it mean for our own futures in relation to these governments?
What do you have some sympathy for the argument that, okay, in order for me to do that down the line, I need to be quiet about this in the short term?
No, I don't have any sympathy for that argument, because I don't find anything in our faith that that warrants this quietness.
Could it be just a matter of strategy and tactic that, okay, in order for me to, I don't know, maybe somebody wants to, I don't know, run as a member of parliament or something, so that they're able to hold government to account in that sphere.
I'm not really interested in what people do on an individual basis. That's between them and Allah. If somebody chooses, like you said about the secret believer, to enter into like the halls of power and whatever else and play a long game and try and affect change from within, look, that's on them. That's a relationship between them and Allah. We will operate based on what we see on the face of it, right? So if they look like ostensibly they're involving themselves with a party that is complicit in and enacting a genocide, then unfortunately they're going to have to take the licks. It's that simple. You know, I'm sorry, but
maybe
like,
they'll be forgiven by Allah. But
maybe they'll be forgiven by Allah. Maybe they'll be vindicated by Allah.
Punches.
But when we're not in the business of taking care of anybody's feelings in the middle of a genocide, I'm sorry. But if you choose to play that role, then inshallah I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala vindicates you on Yawm al-Qiyamah, but the community can't vindicate you. If you look
it would be too costly.
that you are being complicit and you are directly involving yourself in an administration, then, you know, unfortunately you will be held to task for that. And I think there are lots of Muslim MPs right now who are in the Labour Party who are doing a very poor job of understanding what a genocide actually means. You know, even if we look at our Justice Secretary, right? Like, she's a lawyer. She should understand what the implications of genocide are. And I don't think she's fully grasped yet how significant this is. And there will come a moment where all of those who are involved in this administration will be held to task, inshallah, for the role that they've played. And I fear for her herself, actually, of the position that she holds right now in relation to the seniority of her position. And of course, the fact that she occupies a legal position within that administration.
What do you say to those people who say, okay, you're telling scholars and general leaders to speak out more, support people affected, political prisoners? That's not enough. How can there be a genocide and all we're doing is talking? Right,
but we have to start from somewhere, right? What we're trying to do is right now, if the discourse is down here, we have to raise it by one rank. Okay, we have to, and yes, the letter is aimed at ulema, but it's a conversation. And I wrote it specifically that when I didn't call individuals out by name for that reason, which is we all have to do more. I mean, I get to work on, you know, the cases of oppressed Muslims every single day of my life. Alhamdulillah, I feel very, very blessed for being able to do it and to be able to work alongside an organization like Cage International to do that work. but you don't think internally we're holding ourselves to account for not being able to do enough. Honestly, like it sickens us. It sickens us inside our own organization who work tirelessly. And I'm telling you that, you know, people in KG do not work normal hours at all. Okay, it sickens us that we still don't feel like we're doing enough yet. But that's our mandate, that's our responsibility. We're supposed to take care of that, okay? And we're trying our best to do that. We have to be better, but also so does everyone else as well. But if we don't move collectively upwards, okay, at least have a baseline for what the conversation should look like. At least have a baseline for accepting that Zionism should not be permitted to exist as an ideology in this world, right? Then how can we move forward? If we have people still, Muslims to this day, who are saying, well, you know, the Palestinians should be okay with 2 Bantustans, okay, and to live in these small, tiny little areas where they will have 0 rights, then what does that say about who we are in the future of our religion, the future of what our identity is as Muslims in the UK, right? So, yeah, we can say we need to actually get to the level where we're all stopping the weapons from leaving this country. But we're nowhere near that point yet. Right now, we just need them to be talking about the fact that is something that is a righteous thing to do. Even at a theoretical level would be better than right now, which is silence.
Okay. Jazakallah khair. Is there anything else you wanted to say in terms of, to wrap up the conversation, in terms of practical advice to not just ulama but to anyone listening?
Yeah, no, exactly. I think, like, of course, the main thing is that I think we all have to be better educated. Like, we really do, and not just kind of like on liberal talking points, you know, the kind of like Mahdi Hassan talking points about Palestine, which really, unfortunately, don't get us very far. I think we need to understand what the ethics of the Palestinian cause are from the ethics of the Quran itself. Right, so we have to come to grips with, well, what does the Quran teach us about how we should be thinking about reflecting upon this genocide right now? Then I think we actually have to inculcate a degree of bravery in ourselves, and we do that by showing solidarity with one another, for sure, okay, but also for other organizations that are maybe taking more risks than we are. Like, that in itself, that act of solidarity will raise the entire community, because it will show that, oh, okay, we understand that this is a movement. And that sister in prison that my wife and I met, one of the things that she kept on talking about is unity, 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 building that unity. But building unity amongst those organizations that are really trying to push back against the Zionist state itself. Not just saying, oh, we want the ceasefire to end. The ceasefire ends tomorrow, okay, so what? The Palestinians still have to live under occupation, right? We have to have a higher ethic that we're calling people towards, one that is rooted in our tradition, because we as Muslims constantly talk about Islam has answers to everything. Islam has answers to this as well. It really does. The Quran has answers to this, and we have to take that seriously if we're going to move forward as a people.
Yeah. Jazakallah khair. We have a campaign that we're working on to launch soon after Ramadan, inshallah, called Palestine Truth, to weave some of these things in a Quranic and Islamic kind of paradigmatic approach to what's happening, clarifying misconceptions and giving people that information that they need, inshallah.
Inshallah, look forward to it.
Yeah, you're gonna be part of it, inshallah.
Oh, right, okay. Inshallah.
Jazakallah
Whatever
khair
role we can play.
Jazakallah khair for your time. And Jazakallah khair for you watching at home. If you like this podcast, give a like and a share as usual, and let us know in the comments below what you think. Until next time, I've been your host Salman Butt. This has been Dr. Asim Qureshi. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.